Now we're live. Yay. What happened there? Hello, everybody. Oh, technical issues. Who knows what they were? All right. Let me start with you, Jimmy. Jimmy, give me some good advice on securing containers, securing Kubernetes. Just some good advice.
Some good advice. All right. It's not perfect advice, but it's good enough. We will start with checking your workload configurations against the CIS benchmarks for Kubernetes.
Huh.
It's a good start.
That's a good tip. That's a good starting tip. All right, Mark, give me some bad advice.
So many options. I'm going to go with
any that you've done possibly.
I'm going to say using Kubernetes default configurations and relying on it for security.
Oh, all right. So don't go with the default. Give me some worse advice there, Jimmy. What do you got for worse advice?
All right. So I would say as fun as building DIY in Kubernetes yourself or doing it the hard way is, but running kind of boutique hand-rolled clusters in production would be pretty bad advice.
Oh, yeah, that I will agree with you. That is pretty bad advice. Well, let's start the show. Why don't we?
Get ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Super Cyber Friday. Today's topic is hacking Kubernetes, a very popular topic as shown by the number of people registered for today's event. It's an hour of critical thinking on dealing with new and emerging complex and transient container environments. Our guest today, who you just met, are Mark Manning. He's the principal security architect for Snowflake. He's the gentleman with the larger beard than Jimmy Mesta, who's CTO over at KSOC. And by the way, KSOC, they're our awesome sponsor for today. Thank you, KSOC, for sponsoring this very episode of Super Cyber Friday. Hey, lots of different ways to participate. Let me just highlight that our bad idea is going to be how not to secure a container. And the flip of that is our good advice, how to secure a container. Just any small tip will do. By the way, vote in polls, bring me on, ask a question, vote for your favorite question. And there's the chat room, too. All right, today's schedule, you saw it. And then we got the good advice, bad advice, worse advice, how not to secure your container, how to secure a container. We'll play the public interest. We'll have our polls live. We'll play the department yes. Last question, final advice, and the meetup. I'm going to really stress the meetup today. You out there who has not yet come to one of our meetups at the end of the show, I want you at the meetup at the end of the show because it's going to be a lot of fun, and I guarantee it. It's a chance to have face-to-face time with your fellow cybersecurity professionals for just a half hour, and sometimes you go a whole day and you don't have any time with them. So this is an opportunity for that. Our next scheduled show, believe it or not, we don't have a scheduled show all of April, although I'm on vacation and also there's RSA too as well, but not until May. But go ahead. Why not? Register for our next scheduled show, Hacking Security Culture, an hour of critical discussion on motivating the entire organization to always be thinking consciously about security. And guess what? There's a button up at the bottom of the screen where you could do just that. If you do that, you'll open up another window. It will not take you out of this, and you can register for that event. And why do you want to register early? Because you're automatically entered in a raffle to win one of these awesome CISO Series jackets. And congrats to this week's winner, Gandhi Ramanatham, who has not responded. So if you know Gandhi, why don't you get Lim Prada, emailed him, tell him that he has won his jacket, and I bet you he would want it too as well. All right. I'm actually going to do something different than I normally do to start the show. I'm going to share my screen again to show a really interesting Twitter poll that Anton Chuvakin, who is with Google, used to be an analyst with Gartner, he put up this poll that he said, in general, containers are better for security or worse for security. And it's about 2/3 better, 1/3 worse. I mean, almost exactly down that line. And actually, I noticed a couple of comments from our regulars here. Dwayne Grand said, on balance, short-lived environments are better and stand an improved chance of the security team providing oversight on base image hardening guidelines. And also, Fernando said containers done right are wonderful for security done right on the other hand. So let me ask the two of you, I'll make this vanish again. Give me an argument on why containers are wonderful and why they stink. I'll start with you, Jimmy.
This is so easy to fall into the "it depends" trap.
Right.
It's not even funny, right? So
Yeah.
I would.
And
I would
by the way,
agree. Yeah,
Anton in his poll did
yeah,
acknowledge that.
yeah. Of course, right? So, and I would agree with the comment of when done correctly, containers are a really strong security boundary. The problem is, what does being done correctly really mean for your organization? And there's different levels of that. So, if I had my way, containers, would be that boundary and be the most secure way to run any workload. So yeah, I think they offer a lot to the security community. And when we do it right, they're an amazing tool to ship software quickly and safely.
So, Mark, is it just really easy to do it wrong?
It's getting so complicated and complex, right? To do it right, that it's not just that like, oops, I did it wrong. It's just like, oops, it's how do I manage auth? How do I do this in the container? How do I set up a seccomp profile? It's like, do I need to do all these things just to make this container secure? So I kind of blame the complexity as the first thing that's causing problems.
And we always say that complexity is the enemy of security, for that matter. So this would pretty much play into that. Yes, Mark?
Absolutely. I think over and over, we're just saying like, how do we secure Kubernetes? How do we secure a container? And no one really knows because it depends. Back to Jimmy's comment, it's like, it depends on how you need to secure it and what you expect to do with it.
All right. Well, then let's walk through the "it depends." Let's talk about some good advice of walking through it, and we can also highlight the OWASP top 10 Kubernetes risks. In fact, I'll pull it up on the screen for everybody. I have it just in a text document, but I'll pull it up, the official one. But walk us through the sort of the depends experience, and let me just couch it this way when I ask this question. Do you have to say it depends because every time you see a Kubernetes environment, it's like, oh, well, it's now this thing. Oh, no, now it's this thing. Like, it always looks surprising to you, Jimmy?
Probably not surprising. I think everybody uses, this day and age, everybody uses Kubernetes a little differently. And that adds, that's why we choose this container orchestrator in the first place. But there's some amazing use cases and some just bad abuse of using Kubernetes, right? Like just dumping everything in the default namespace or giving everybody cluster admin. There's no two environments that look the same. Even I would say at one organization, it's hard to find two clusters that look the same. And they all have a little bit different of a security profile. That's why it's complex. There's a standardization. By the way,
you're responsible for authoring this top 10 list, right, Jimmy?
I am. Yeah. Well, if people like it, I'm responsible. If not, it's the community. Yeah. No.
All right. So Mark, I'll have you then. Feel free to call out anything, the first sort of big "it depends" from this list that you see.
I think what Jimmy was pointing out, like insecure workload configurations, I think it depends. It's a really good one because I think, I've seen containers on firewalls. I've seen containers in weird places. I've seen containers in cars. And it's like, well, what is this threat model in those environments? What should I actually expect from the container? So like securing it in different ways, depending on your threat model, I think is a really good one to highlight.
All right, close this out here. And by the way, everyone, get your questions in. I'm sure you have plenty of questions about Kubernetes. These two people
have a lot of bad ideas happening in chat.
Are there?
That's
really good.
Hilarious.
Here's the thing, and I give the audience crap about this every single time. You will see they always have way more bad ideas than they have good ideas.
Yeah, the Tupperware one was definitely a winner for sure.
All right, well. Who submitted I didn't see the Tupperware one. Who submitted that one?
It's up at the top. John Procap. Replace
John
Kubernetes
Procap.
containers with Tupperware containers as they are airtight.
Oh.
It's a bad idea.
I like the one just about pronouncing Kubernetes. I feel like no one knows how to really do it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think you could get by with being bad at pronouncing Kubernetes. All right. So again, audience, get your questions in, and by the way, don't feel afraid to put in good advice too, as well.
There's no good advice. Yeah, it's just bad.
Let's though talk about though where Kubernetes fits along the greater security program, because obviously, if you were aggressive about using Kubernetes, it's got to be a part of your security program. And people talk about building out the security program. So, explain how you're sort of building that into your security effort, Jimmy.
Yeah, it's a great topic because we look at Kubernetes at KSOC as a data center inside of your data center, and that is highly simplifying things. But at the end of the day, that's why the OWASP top 10 exists, because you've all of a sudden abstracted through standardized API calls and container orchestration, all sorts of different things that we had more eyes on before. And I'll say like networking, secrets management, just access control, authorization, authentication, even, as far as like a runtime sort of observability perspective, that all lives inside of this cluster that it doesn't have the same scrutiny on it as we did with, cloud or virtual machines or, just AWS and things like that. So, that's kind of my take on the whole topic.
Mark?
Yeah, I think in my career I've seen Kubernetes appear in people's environments in really interesting ways. Sometimes it'll be on purpose. Hey, we're going to go Kubernetes. Sometimes it's, hey, we've got this merger and acquisition. They're using Kubernetes. Now we've got to kind of bring them into our tech stack. And sometimes there's just like, hey, I think we should do this Kubernetes. I think it'll save us money. There's a lot of like excuses. And I think that's a various like set of scenarios to think through of, if you did it on purpose, you kind of have more control. You can kind of slow it down and say, okay, this needs to be in parallel with our existing, product security program.
So what did you do when can you tell us sort of your path?
Yeah, we did it on purpose, right? At Snowflake, we have Kubernetes with very specific use cases, but it's a variety of use cases. So we have a dedicated team that thinks through this. They're very smart and they have consistent kind of environments for us. Mm-hmm. So like the key thing for us was, we've got a monolithic stack, for some portion of it. And then we also have containers. And how do we take our product security program, make sure that we can still do the stuff in our monolith as we can do in the container world? And I think that's like an interesting challenge to make sure there's parity, because it's a different thought process between the two tech stacks.
By the way, along the same lines of what you were saying about pronouncing Kubernetes, Stephen Giger, you know what? I'm screwing up his name. He told me how to pronounce it once, and I'm now forgetting it. It's a name. It's pronounced the same as there's a famous hockey player that has the same last name, and it's pronounced the same way. That I remember. Steve, do me a favor, put it phonetically in there so I can pronounce it correctly. Get your questions in, everybody. And in just 2 minutes, I'm actually going to get to using tools in just a second. I actually want to do it after our game. So I'm sorry, Jimmy. Mark explained how he approached it. What are other sort of methods you've seen approaching Kubernetes security? Just give us sort of like highlights on them and sort of different paths that they've come from other customers.
Yeah, we get engaged usually at a point where Kubernetes kind of made its way into an organization in more of a rogue fashion, right? Like, and you see this a lot where there's this R&D spike where one team tries to, build something new on top of Kubernetes. They want to use containers. They have their own CI. They have their own special way of kind of getting applications running, and it kind of spreads like wildfire throughout an organization. And oftentimes the security team gets brought in a little late, right? You're already running quite
That's a common story, by the way.
Yeah, super common. It's because it's so easy, right? You can literally click a button, spin up an EKS cluster. And you're like, this kind of works. And all of a sudden you're serving real kind of production style traffic from that cluster. So there's like, what we've seen is like phase one is kind of firefighting, where you're just trying to get an asset inventory. Where are the clusters running? Is it managed, unmanaged? Somebody, a laptop under somebody's desk, and how are they running, right? Like at a high level, do you have any sort of indication of what those workloads are doing, how they're configured? Again, back to the CIS benchmarks, probably a good start to see like, what's my general posture here. And then you can go more into the lockdown phase, right? Applying emission control or building images in-house, blocking things in CI that shouldn't pass go into the cluster, network observability, sort of kind of container runtime observability, ingesting audit logs. Like, that's kind of the last phase, right? First is just gaining control of your environment. So that's the phases we call it crawl, walk, run, but it's the same thing. It's firefight and then patch.
It has a little bit of the same elements that we've seen with other sort of what we call shadow IT, consumerization of IT type stuff as well. All right, let's get to our next game.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right, a popular game for everybody here, the public interest. It's very simple to play. Audience, please play along. There's a lot of you there, so I'm expecting you to play along. And we already got our first question. That's great. Get more questions in. Here we go. First question. Most average monthly search queries, is it Kubernetes or is it containers? Or containers, Kubernetes? A or B, what do you guys think? Jimmy? Mark?
I'm going to go with, I've proven to be bad at this game, but I'll go with containers because it spans the public into different areas. So A.
All right. And what are you going?
It's logical, but I'm still going to go Kubernetes because I feel like there's so many crazy Kubernetes questions on the internet. People are just searching constantly.
That good way of looking at it. And yes, good answer. Way to go. Good job, Mark. All right, next question. Servers, virtual machines, or containers? What gets more?
Mark's going first.
I'm gonna go servers. There's so many people looking for jobs as servers. There's servers that were running stuff, so I'm going C.
All right, what do you think?
I'm gonna do the same.
C.
Yep.
Servers. And very good. You're on the board. Good job. 2 for 2 for you right now. As I said, very difficult to get 4. Let's see how you do. Next question. All right. Ephemeral, dynamic, transient, or static? This is a tough one.
This one's going to be a
Jimmy,
surprise. I feel like, G, dynamic.
Dynamic.
I'm going to go spicy and say transient. I think there's so many different things out there.
All right. Going dynamic or transient. And the correct answer is ephemeral. This one, by the way, ironically, a dynamics transient tied. I was surprised by ephemeral too. This is like we played in the other game, the serendipity. Like the last word you think people would be looking up. But it's doing better. All right. So 1 for 3, 2 for 3. Who's going to get it? Could be a tie or Mark could pull it away. OWASP or application security?
Oh, man.
Wow.
Jimmy.
OWASP.
I'm gonna go application security.
All right, we're gonna see what happens, and it's gonna be OWASP wins. It's a tie. Good job. Very good job. Congrats to both of you there.
The 2-word search query, is a tough one.
Yeah,
so
it's too much. I'm glad that OWASP is being searched. That's
great. People care.
All right, let's see what question we got coming in here. This is a good question from David Kerber. What kind of problems do you avoid using Kubernetes for? I'll ask you, Mark.
To save money. I'll say if you've got a team like management that's saying, hey, I read this awesome article on Kubernetes, how it's more, whatever, dynamic, auto scaling, and you think it's going to save money in the cloud, I think that's an anti-pattern.
Okay.
Usually the opposite. That's a good one. I would say this is definitely a spicy take, but like databases running inside of Kubernetes. I mean, I know it's very possible and people do it successfully. I think we don't need to containerize everything. And sometimes MySQL can just be MySQL and it can live on a server and you can have replicas and call it a day. It doesn't have to live in Kubernetes.
All right, that's a very good one. All right, now I want to get to this question I kind of teased just beforehand because I wanted to learn more specifically about what KSOC is doing. There are, and I'm sure there's lots of advice in the OWASP top 10, and so you can kind of walk me through both and also explain how KSOC's getting involved. But what tools do you have to manage these types of workloads? And so I will start with you to explain what KSOC is doing and dealing with Kubernetes, Jimmy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've used and seen and kind of interacted with every tool out there over the course of the past 5 to 6 years, and KSOC was really built to be almost an extension of Kubernetes. We do everything real time, all the instrumentation, lifecycle management, and we do that because Kubernetes is ephemeral and it is so volatile, right? Average container lifespan is 5 minutes. And when I was kind of tasked with doing periodic scans of clusters where I would every day or every week or, forbid every quarter scanning your cluster, you're not actually hitting the mark, right? You're missing the whole point by doing this point in time scan. So we built kind of an entire, live, like real-time streaming platform that works in the way Kubernetes does to detect, remediate, and respond to security issues. And, with the goal of actually building, standardized hardened clusters across the board, right? Like not just one with 50, 100, 200 clusters that have guardrails in place.
So how are you doing that for something that is living and dying in 5 minutes? Like I may not find out about it in that 5 minutes.
Well, we will. And, we hook into Kubernetes API in a variety of ways, and we stream that data off cluster, right? And do post-processing. We don't, we have our core tenet is like, don't impact performance of the cluster. Mm-hmm. So we do post-processing on our side and correlate all of that with the policies that you choose against that cluster. And we watch that container spawn and have a misconfiguration or 10 and then go away, and we know if the problem was fixed or if it still persists. So it's a real-time view into the cluster from a security perspective, which is unique.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, you are using KSOC in your environment?
No, but now that I hear about it, I think I need it.
Okay.
They've got a holistic approach that we do a lot of things. We do a lot of pieces, but like the fact that it's like kind of one single entity that can kind of manage all of that is kind of a nice property. We do a lot of admission controllers. We'll restrict what goes into the cluster, and we'll kind of give the guardrails there. We look at runtime monitoring, and our big thing is like giving feedback to the developers when they're building something that we don't think is secure. So we try to pride ourselves on just doing that pre-analysis, like right in the the developer experience, to give them at least some signal.
So let's talk about the signals. Let's talk about the before and after signals. Let's start with you, Mark. What are some of the before signals you see?
Yeah, there'd be like container usage. Just one simple example is like you're using a very old version of a container, and like that's part of your dependency for your application. We can give you pretty easy visibility in saying like, hey, why aren't you using the latest? Why do you have this one that's got 5,000 CVEs in it, or or something like that? So giving signal on that type of stuff, I think, is a big one that we're tackling right now.
And you can talk about before or after, Jimmy. Like, I'm assuming are you looking at stuff beforehand or only after the fact? Where are you looking?
So we actually just in the past 2 weeks released an admission controller that does things in quotes before. So essentially what it does is you can apply policies in observe mode where notify me, when there's violations, like Mark said, is this container out of date, or did it come from a source I don't trust? And now we have the ability to block that, right? And we give instant feedback to the developer that says, hey, you can't run a pod that looks like this because of these policies. Mm-hmm. And we also have a dry run mode, which is really kind of cool, where we can say, because going into blocking mode is not common. Mark is really good at his job and they have an advanced team, but admission control is hard to do because it can break things, right? So we built a dry run mode that lets the security team kind of let things bake in, right, and understand what would be blocked in this situation. And we just released a blog 2 days ago. There was a kind of this Dero cryptocurrency miner that came out, and it was found inside of Kubernetes clusters in the wild. And it's kind of like we outline in the post of how we stop that sort of thing. It's through a variety of ways, but admission control is very effective in saying you can't run privileged workloads, especially ones that come from Docker Hub, right? They have to come from, your own internal registry. That's a quick way to stop this sort of stuff from spreading.
All right, I'm going to come back to you, Mark, in just a second, but I do want to remind everybody, our poll has been live actually for a few minutes now, and we're going to be playing our Department of Yes game in about 14 minutes. So please vote on your favorite bad idea. You can still submit bad ideas in. Please get them in. This is you would post something about the crypto thing. We can do a quick mention of that in just a second, but so please vote and please get your good ideas and your bad ideas in. Do we have? By the way, I'm going to ask Aaron in the back channel. Do we have any good ideas that have come in? I don't even know. I'm giving the audience a lot of crap if they don't give us any good idea. No, he says. All right, now you're all getting crap. No good ideas. We got plenty of bad ideas. None. You can't come up with a single good idea how to deal with this? Come on. Give us some good ideas because we want to get a poll up on the good ideas. All right. But go vote in the bad ideas as well. All right. I got a question here. Jern, I don't know, Joern. I don't know how to pronounce that first name. Jern F asks, and I'll throw this to you, Mark. What kind of, quote, insecure backplanes should never be configured across containers?
Insecure backplanes. I guess I need more information. What?
I don't know what he's referring to. It's true.
I can talk about like control planes though. In general, of like the Kubernetes has this model where you've got these workers and everything, and the workers are kind of just everything's going great. But if you compromise the control plane, all bets are off, as with most control planes. But it's just not a guarantee with Kubernetes. So spending time identifying control plane problems, such as things like etcd being exposed, things like the Kubernetes API just being exposed to your workers, things like RBAC problems. These are all things of just trying to isolate that control plane that I think you've got to invest pretty heavily in.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Jimmy?
Yes. I mean, the Kubernetes API is your main control plane, and then the kubelet on each worker node. But the Kubernetes API, it has to, there's a long debate happening. It just seems never ending on like, is it okay to leave it on the internet? Right. That's a pretty basic question. Some people are like, yes. And I would say, no, it's not, because why would you expose an API unnecessarily? And yeah, there's in the control plane and the kubelet, there's nitty gritty little bits of configuration, true false values that I would say even the most well-versed operator wouldn't totally understand the combination of these things, right? Like there's anonymous authentication, there's how the kubelet authorizes, there's things that can get you in trouble that you would never catch, right? And you could be the best platform team in the world and still accidentally set this up the wrong way.
And there's also just CVEs, just to mention that, things being exposed. There was just, 2 weeks ago, there was a pretty dramatic CVE about like using the Kubernetes API. If you had any level of access to it, you could kind of compromise other areas of the cluster. So for sure.
By the way, there was a news report that came out, and I know KSOC responded to it about this Dero cryptocurrency miner that was looking for, as I understand, they were looking for anonymous authentication that could pretty much, you could just get in. Why there was anonymous open, I have no idea, but I guess it was, and why it even existed for that matter. Can you explain what this was, Jimmy, and how you guys responded to KSOC? Yeah,
so cryptocurrency miners are by far the most popular way to exploit Kubernetes. It's just what you end up finding in a cluster, whether you knew it was there or not, mainly because there's many ways to get a program running inside of Kubernetes. And this is really no different. The anonymous kind of authentication authorization piece here is just a flag that you can set at the API server, a bad one. When set to true, chaos ensues. But the problem here is that this cryptocurrency miner, that's not the only way to get this thing running inside of a cluster, right? The kind of classic way would be you have a web application vulnerability, call it remote code execution, and you break out of the context of that container, and all of a sudden you have a shell in a container. You may or may not be able to escalate your privileges to the host. And then if you can run your cryptocurrency miner on the host as a process outside of the scope of Kubernetes, you're going to be hanging out there for a while mining cryptocurrency. Most teams won't see that. And we see a lot of this, right? And some of them have built-in worms where they'll scan Shodan and the internet and find more open APIs and plant themselves in another Kubernetes cluster. So it's a pretty aggressive thing, but like Kubernetes is a great platform to mine cryptocurrency. And we're just going to see more of that.
Oh, good to know. Thanks for that advice. Just a quick reminder, everybody, click on the button at the bottom of the screen to register for our May 12th event. Hopefully we'll have events before that, but right now, that's our next one we got scheduled. So please register for that. Remember, if you register early, you are registered. You're also registered in the raffle to win an awesome jacket on top of it. And we are about 9 minutes away from our next game. So please, if you have not, I think it's at this time we do it. Hold on, what time? Maybe I'm off on my time. Oh, excuse me. Hold on. Do it. Yeah, 40 minutes past the hour. Please do vote in the poll as well. All right, let's go to let's go to the Kubernetes top 10 again. Did I close that window? Hold on. I hope I didn't close that window. Here we go. Let me open this back up again. Because I want to address, because I mean, it seems appropriate that we should be looking at specifically that, because it is kind of the outline to this entire problem that we're discussing. So looking at this top 10 list, I'm going to ask, pick your favorite, Jimmy and Mark. Like which one, I'll say this, which is the biggest one? I'm going to say insecure workload configurations. That's where we started. Would you agree that's where you got to start, because that is number one?
I think that it's so broad and large and all-encompassing that it has to start as number one. I'll let Mark expand on it. He's dealing with some of this stuff every day, I'm sure.
No, I think so. I think this goes into like the CIS benchmarks. You just go like, what's an insecure configuration? Like most organizations don't know. And even if you have the experts, you're not sure. So like, I think that's a huge one to just start tackling, like number one, top of the list. Yeah.
And then let me also throw this question out. Okay. Of this list, which is the one that is ignored and way too dangerous to ignore?
I'm gonna go first and say like the supply chain one. That's just top of mind for me, because like number one, like the industry isn't really in agreement on how we handle the supply chain problem. And number two, there's just so many third-party dependencies that get baked into your cluster. Like that alone should make you nervous, even if you've got the most secure cluster, and then like it's perfectly restricted and RBAC is solved. And then you go, oh yeah, but then there's this open source project that we upstream directly into our clusters, and now we're in trouble all over again. So I think that's a huge one just to think through for organizations and have a plan like long term for that.
Yeah, and I mean that's true with all third-party security. I don't think it's isolated to just Kubernetes for that matter. Jimmy, would you agree, or would you pick another one that is like nasty that people don't realize?
I always pick I'm predictable, though. It's always number 3, overly permissive RBAC. RBAC is it ranges from when we talk to folks who kind of mix it in with like AWS IAM or some other thing, and it's its own authorization mechanism inside of Kubernetes, and it is highly complicated, right? This is not just like a very simple like Jimmy has read only. It's to what in what namespace does he have the impersonate verb? It is this crazy tangled web of configuration that can give humans or non-humans in the form of service accounts the ability to do anything in the cluster, right? Like this is API access and authorization, and it is woefully ignored. That's just in my experience. These are all important, obviously. Supply chains vast, like huge, but that one is a ticking time bomb.
That's well, and again, it's interesting. This so reflects other security concerns. I mean, I look at this list. I'm like, yeah, it's just you mapped all the general security concerns onto Kubernetes.
This could be here 20 years ago, and it could be like how to do data center security. It'd be the same stuff. That's what we do in security, though.
Okay, so let's then here. I'm just going to shut this off temporarily. Let's then talk about that very issue. You're saying this could have been on the top 10 list for data center security, and we talked at the beginning about it depends. What is the problem and again, we talked about like, does it make it easier or worse? What is the problem that we can create for ourselves that will turn a small security issue into a monstrous security issue in terms of how we set up our containers, Jimmy?
Yeah. So it is rarely one finding within a cluster that leads to total incomplete cluster takeover or cloud account takeover. Mm-hmm. It is kind of, 1,000 cuts, right? And these could be all considered low, or even you wouldn't even know that they exist, but the combination of them turn into a really bad situation. So if you just take the lack of logging, like anomaly detection, right? And we have a lot of customers that don't even turn on Kubernetes API audit logs, or maybe didn't even know what to do with them. Then if you don't have that and something happens, you have no way to go back in time and see who did it, and mix that in with sharing credentials or using, cluster admin, where you can't really tie it back to a user. And all of a sudden you have no attribution during an event. And then the container disappears because somebody deleted it and you have no IR process. You have a very bad situation that's like kind of something you can't recover from. So you can pick any of these, combine them together, and you could end up very blind to bad things actively happening in your cluster.
Very good point. What would you add to that, or would you say something else?
No, I want to go back to like the incident response thing, because that's the thing that's something for the last like 5 or so years. Like I just keep asking more and more IR people, like, hey, how do you respond to a Kubernetes incident? And they go, I don't know, we image stuff, and like, but there's not a really strong story, and there's not a lot of tooling to do that. So if I go, oh, there's actually an event going on, what do? We just kind of cordon off the cluster and hope for the best. So I feel like Kubernetes moves so fast, and it's changing the way that we have to do a lot of things, that our tools are not yet mature enough to handle things like in the cloud or in the monolith and other bare metal environments.
And I'll add one more thing on it's an overarching theme, and it's kind of why we use Kubernetes, because of its self-service nature, right? Historically, an ops team would deploy software for you, not everywhere, but some places. And that was done through some form of automation in servers in a data center. Today, a developer checks in code into a Git repository. You have an automatic process in the cluster that sees that change, picks it up, builds an image, puts it in a registry. Then all of a sudden it goes through the Kubernetes API, lands on a node, and you're running. It's a platform that's built for self-service. And that is a different threat model than, kind of a castle that you've built where you only release things that have met a certain level of checkboxes. So it's a different self-service model that opens up, innovation and speed, but it also opens up all sorts of problems that we just talked about.
I want to also highlight that one of the points that you brought up, Jimmy, like in the beginning, is like the automation requirements. You're talking about like the CI/CD and the kind of controls of how to release something in there. And the alternative, though, is what really scares me, is like there's a artisanally crafted, Kubernetes cluster with a bunch of people that have kubectl access to it. And then the scale of Kubernetes, it makes it so easy to just well, let's add more nodes, let's auto scale up. And then suddenly we have this one little pod that's suddenly deployed a whole bunch of other places. We've got crypto miners that are, auto scaled up to, 5 or 100 nodes. Do we have the visibility and response capabilities to that stuff? That's what scares me.
All right. Hey, we got a call. It just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right. We are now going to play our game, the Department of Yes. I want to remind everybody, click on the link at the bottom of the screen to register for next week's Super Cyber Friday. And also, Aaron, you can drop the poll of the good ideas, of which I saw a few come in. Hopefully we got a handful there. So I think I saw 2 good ideas come in. You had mentioned this earlier, Mark, John Prokop's bad idea. It's a runaway hit in the poll. Replace Kubernetes containers with Tupperware containers as they are airtight. Why is it that you want to actually do this? Tell me, you're working for the Department of Yes.
Okay, so we're running, our Kubernetes clusters are going in Tupperware containers. They're all running on Raspberry Pis. We're going to run a network cable into the Tupperware containers. This is a new boundary for us for hackers to crack. They have to get through plastic now.
So you're actually somehow you're wiring the Tupperware containers that will actually connect.
We're poking a hole through the Tupperware firewall, getting the network cables in there. Yeah, and
all right. I like the creativity. I'm still having a hard time figuring it out, but I like it. Jimmy, why are you doing this?
I went straight to Raspberry Pis as well. I think instead of poking a hole in the given Tupperware container, I would just get a bigger Tupperware container and put multiple Raspberry Pis in it, and then I would probably submerge it underwater in like an underwater data center somewhere off the coast of Antarctica. Yeah,
I like that. Like in the case of compromise, it just gets flooded. You just got to.
All right. This next bad idea, the next one comes from Matt Black. Open management ports to the world. And by the way, this literally reads like the Dero case. I hate to break it. But open management ports to the world and see what attackers go after first. Does this kind of read like the Dero case? It's kind of the same thing. Why do you want to do this? Jimmy,
I'll go. I absolutely support this idea because we can build a honeypot, right? Like this is not this is actually something that we do for research purposes, right? You deploy an intentionally vulnerable Kubernetes cluster and, see what commands people are running, what tools are hitting it, and you can learn a lot. So that's a great idea.
Actually, not a bad idea at all. Oh, yeah! Okay. Mark, I throw this to you. Why do you want to do this?
I was going to go the route of, pen testing and red teaming is really expensive. We can completely cut the bill by just opening it to the internet and saying, let's see what they can do.
So we've had that answer, and we've had this various questions before. So yes, it's a free form of pen testing, if you will. Apparently, I accidentally submitted a good idea. Yes, you did, Matt. You did do that. Stick around for our meetup, which we're going to have in about 17 minutes. I wanted you all to stick around for our meetup, so please, that link at the bottom of the screen is going to change in a little less time than that. So if you haven't registered for the May event, please register now and get ready for a meetup because we want all of you there. All right. Hey, we've got good tips that are come in. Hold on. What am I? Oh, that's the bad ideas. You can take yes, we have 2 good tips in. Kudos. I'm going to say kudos right now. I know the one that's voted the best right now is from Larry Rose, and he says, don't move to Kubernetes without understanding how it impacts your security controls. Oh, that is a good topic. We have not discussed that. How does this impact your current controls? Let's start with you, Mark.
We again try to get like in parity with our existing stuff. So Kubernetes came like after we already built this giant database system. So it's always about like mapping it back to the original controls. We do a lot of CIS organizationally. So we just, did a direct map into what we do with Kubernetes and stuff.
Anything to add to that, Jimmy?
It's a great piece of advice. I think the one caveat is your existing security controls were probably built for a different system, right? That system was much less ephemeral. keyword or search word, and it there isn't always a mapping from like I did SOC 2 and PCI and these other things, and now I'm going to just do it the same in Kubernetes. And we've seen people try. They'll take old school HIDS platforms or kind of things they kind of ran on a virtual machine and just like plop it into Kubernetes, and they're like, I'm good, right? And it doesn't even work, right? Like it doesn't even give you the right type of alert, or it floods you with things that are irrelevant. So you do need to build the in-house expertise and adapt to your existing security controls.
By the way, here's another piece of good advice from Hassan, who I realize had the Dero cryptocurrency people taken this advice, they may have not had the problem that they had. And Hassan suggests perform threat modeling exercises beforehand to help identify specific vulnerabilities. Always good advice in general. But actually, do you do that, Mark? Any threat modeling specifically?
Heavily. Well, Snowflake is huge on like threat modeling for almost anything. Like our program dictates that developers are going to threat model high risk things. And that's the same for if you're setting up a new cluster, same for if you're setting up a new application in the cluster. And we've built this kind of database, if you will, of threat models that we can kind of compare against. So one of the big value props is we have a bunch of threat models from other Kubernetes clusters we've created or other Kubernetes applications to compare against. So we can give guidance around, hey, this is what we did over here. Why don't you just do like a similar scenario there? But we're huge on risk analysis and threat modeling here.
Okay. Hey, I have a question, and I don't know if this is kind of a complete question, but hopefully you'll. But this comes from Frederick Fernando. Would you prioritize removing root containers from your cluster? Why? Would you? Does this question need a qualifier at any level?
No, it's it's a full question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. A root, just for context, like this is the user, the UID of root, right? Like you're running this process and the container is running as root. This is a classic CIS violation across the board. You see it everywhere. The problem is the question you should be asking is like, does this process need to run as root? And the answer is typically no. And it's much harder to kind of go through that assessment, right? You have to do some real work to figure out like, hey, do I need root level access, or does this thing need sudo style access to do what it needs to do to run successfully? It is a priority because in the event of a compromise, where again, back to the shell on a container scenario, if you land as an attacker on that container, what do you want? Do you want a user that can do nothing, that's part of a group that can do very little, or do you want root? Probably root, right? You have sudo access. There's other tools you can use, like even running parts of Nmap. If you were to do that from that shell, you would be required to have root. So it is extending your blast radius unnecessarily most of the time. That's a long-winded way of saying I would prioritize it.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say this goes back to like that supply chain problem that I want to like double down on, like it being an issue, because using an upstream image, they will say, hey, we're running as a root user. Like Nginx for a while, if you use the Nginx latest, it was running as the root user. And we go, well, I'm just running Nginx. I don't have any choice on this user account at all. So you have to go in and take the upstream image, and maybe you got to rebuild it yourself, not to use the root user. It's a huge cost. And we really want to like get down to yes, we don't want to have the root user, but also what are all these upstreams that still do this? Like we need best practice for the open source images, which is kind of the core problem.
We have another question in that may need a qualifier, but what about API abuse? Do you know where this is coming from? This question. This comes from Rick Bosworth.
There's so Kubernetes is an API, right? You can abuse the Kubernetes API itself. That's one layer. And then there's, am I abusing APIs that are being surfaced inside of the cluster? I think we would have to qualify which one. They both have valid concerns. So, I mean, abusing the Kubernetes API, like that's a part of the top 10. I mean, it's RBAC, it's it's privilege escalation, it's being able to leverage a service account token unnecessarily against it. It's hitting it from the internet. And yeah, I think we could go a million different ways with that particular statement.
And I'll also highlight just what the Kubernetes API can do. It's a lot of weird things. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to request access to this data or, look for things. You can also like tunnel an entire connection. Like now you're kind of SSHing through it, and kubectl will go through it and make a proxy back to a pod, and you can forward ports to it. So there's a lot of abuse opportunities if you just said, oh yeah, I'll give you access to my cluster. There's a lot of things that you can create inside the cluster, not just, reading the information.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me actually, this will give us a little more time at the end. By the way, if you have not clicked that link at the bottom, do that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do our wrap up just a little early. That'll give us a little bit more time to do our closing comments too. So give me just a moment here. And if you have a question, please throw that question in because we'll try to get to it at the very end of the show. All right. Just remind you, click that link at the bottom of if you would like to join us on May 12th as well, Hacking Security. Very fun discussion on just that very topic right there. Remember, please do register early because you're automatically entered in a raffle to win an awesome jacket. Hey, huge thanks to Jimmy's company, KSOC, for sponsoring this very event. They're available. Look, the link was just dropped into the chat room, ksoc.com. Go check them out for all your Kubernetes security needs. As you can see, this, and bare minimum, just go over to the OWASP Top 10 and understand what you need to be dealing with. Hey, starting at 90 minutes from now, or actually 100 minutes from now, at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review with JJ Aga, who's the CISO of FanDuel. It will also, that is going to be on our CISO Series YouTube channel. So head on over there, just youtube.com/CISO Series. Or if you're ever wondering where to find these events, guess what? We have an events page. Just go to the events page on CISOseries.com. Stick around for a meetup. All right, Aaron, you can change that link at the bottom of the screen. And by the way, any of you can click on this at any time now and join us. I want you to come, and I'm specifically talking to the huge number of you out there who don't ever come to our meetup at the end. You're missing out. I'm telling you right now, you're missing out. Please don't miss out. Hey, tell your friends to join us. Well, I say we do this every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, but actually we have a bunch of open slots. So if you want to sponsor us, go ahead and let us know. David at CISOseries.com. We can set you up. I am going to be not available for a few weeks in April, but we do have a few weeks open in April. All right. With that being said, let's wrap this show up. And I will ask you last thoughts, Jimmy, on this topic. And I can bug you with some more questions as well. But when people have Kubernetes in an environment, what are they not thinking about in general?
Yeah, probably a lot, but at a high level, I think that Kubernetes needs a seat at the CISO table, and it's because a few things. The main reason is when we talk about cloud security. And we say, generically cloud security, really, when you look at the percentage of workloads running in a lot of companies, it's growing in the direction of mostly Kubernetes, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of shops are 90% of their cloud spend in their usability inside of the cloud is mostly Kubernetes and the pieces around it. So we need to prioritize at higher levels in the org this program, right? And this program is really complex and has a lot of pieces, as we talked about today. And that's kind of my thing I want to drive home is like, saying cloud security is too broad these days, and we have to be more focused on where the workloads are running and who has access to them and what they're doing. And that starts with understanding Kubernetes in depth.
Complexity, that's how we began the discussion, was talking about it's really complex. And as we all know, complexity being the enemy of security. What about your thoughts? What are not, Mark, what are people not thinking about when they have a Kubernetes environment?
I think oftentimes I used to see when I was consulting with these environments was there was a lot of Kubernetes experts were not security experts, and a lot of security experts were not Kubernetes experts. And there was this divide culturally where we would say, hey, we're kind of the DevOps world, or we're the platform world. We're going to do our own Kubernetes thing over here. Leave us alone. And then the product security team would just say, oh, okay, good luck. Let me know what you guys are doing. Let me know when it's running in production, right?
Mhm.
But I think crossing those boundaries and like actually sitting down with the teams and like understanding what requirements are across was the most common one, of just having that bridge in the technology of like, here's what we're doing over here. Why aren't we doing it in Kubernetes? Because otherwise you risk having these islands that you have to separately secure. And it would be ideal to start mapping, here's what we do over here for compliance. Here's what we do for product security policy directly to Kubernetes, rather than just manage them on their own. Oh, so you're going to kind of run into trouble when they have to interact.
Let's actually talk about the discussion of guardrails, which is something you brought up early, Mark. What are some really good guardrails? And again, in this sort of shift left methodology, what are some good guardrails that save you a lot of angst later on?
I've seen a lot of organizations do the full abstraction away, where you just say like, hey, tell me what you want to run. Is it a web app? Where's your code? We'll take care of the rest for you. Like to me, that's an ideal state where, the teams will manage the entire YAML configuration of the Kubernetes workload. They'll do everything. I think there's a middle ground too of something like OPA Gatekeeper, which is a way of doing an admission controller just complies with a policy. And the important part being feedback back to the user. Hey, you built something, you're pushing it out. Here's your Kubernetes object config. Hey, this doesn't meet with policy. This doesn't look right because of X, Y, and Z. And letting them still have their self-service stuff, but giving them feedback on like why it doesn't meet expectations, and let me guide you in the right direction.
Okay. Jimmy, what about you? What are some good guardrails?
Yeah, I mean, Mark hit a lot of them. I would also add, it's as simple as starting with like, here's our image registry. We're going to use this, and we're going to build it up to support all of your use cases as a developer. Like, you want to build a Node.js thing, we have it, right? Giving people the ability to build while controlling where these different pieces of the stack come from, and then putting blocking mechanisms in place when you deviate outside of what you deem as an appropriate policy. OPA Gatekeeper, KSOC, whatever it is, you can do that at different steps. And, I think we should probably do a little better at giving kubectl access to Kubernetes to individual humans. It's like SSH, and we kind of don't treat it the same. It's like, you have root SSH access on this box, basically. And we just kind of are like, cool, you need to troubleshoot. Here's your kube config. And I think that we can do a little better than that by, giving telemetry elsewhere, getting it out of the cluster, and not having a bunch of super admins kind of poking around.
All right. So we have just a little over 2 minutes left. I'm going to let both of you have essentially a final word here. Mark, any last thoughts on this? And are you hiring over at Snowflake? Anything else you want to and you'll be at our meetup immediately afterwards, yes?
Yep, definitely be there.
So
yeah,
last thoughts quickly.
Snowflake is hiring. Please reach out. I'm in the product security team, so if you're interested in doing that type of work, a lot of fun stuff that we're trying to solve. I go back to like, what are like first principles for Kubernetes? I've seen so many misconfigurations, so many bad stuff. I think the privileged pod stuff is still the thing that comes to mind as the most common one. We talk about root, but running a container as privilege is basically a super high risk scenario that I still see everywhere. Even though we talk about it every time we talk about one of these discussions, it's still everywhere, and it's still like your antivirus or whatever malware scanner that you've installed is running with root privileges on the box. So I'd love to see just that tackled alone.
I mean, everything I've heard today is all the classic security problems in Kubernetes, but now way more complex, way more difficult. I mean, have I summed that up, Jimmy?
I think so. Yeah, sure. It's faster moving, right? It's with less more control, but less control at the same time. Yeah, it's a bunch of knobs and levers that you need to be prepared to turn in the right direction at any given moment. And yeah, so I think the takeaway is like, this thing is a big deal. It's running everywhere and it's running everything, and we need to put it on a bit more of a pedestal than it is from a security perspective today.
All right, quick, 30 seconds. Any last thoughts and any offer you can give to our audience? And are you hiring over at KSOC?
We are hiring backend engineers right now. If you like hacking on Kubernetes and writing Go microservices, definitely reach out. And I don't have like a special discount code for KSOC, but we'll definitely take good care of you if you come to me directly from this show. I guarantee that. And why don't you click on the link at the bottom of the screen, everybody, and you could talk to Jimmy directly about your Kubernetes security needs and talk to Mark as well. And heck, talk to me too and everybody else that's here as well. Please click on that link at the bottom of the screen. Huge thanks to Jimmy and KSOC. Thanks to you, Mark, as well. Thanks to our producers, Aaron and Andrew. By the way, everyone congratulate Andrew. Forgot to mention it. Andrew just got married. He's a married man now, one of our producers. Congrats to Andrew as well. Everybody, Aaron, thank you very much. Take us out.